everyone. All right, we're about to begin. Welcome to the Princeton Electronic Sports Symposium 2012. Thank you all for coming. And also thank you to the Keller Center who sponsored this event, as well as the Mechanical Aerospace Engineering Department and the Department of Electrical Engineering, and also TT eSports. Thank you all. And also thank you for our wonderful panelists today for making this possible. We're lucky to have a distinguished group of innovators and industry leaders who have contributed to this community of esports and this phenomenon of esports. From academic institutions to corporations, pro gaming teams to pro gaming news teams, StarCraft to BarCraft, and everything else, esports has grown to mean much more than just video games. So what is esports? Some of you might not know this, some of you might be very familiar with this. A short definition would be video games as a competitive spectator sport. But as for what esports really is, in order to answer and explore that question fully in depth, I'd like to let our experts introduce themselves for today, their background, their role in esports, how they got from their college major to a profession in video games, and we'll start with Ken Chen.
Hi everyone, I'm Ken Chen. I'm the COO of TeamLiquid.net. We're a news and community website centered around StarCraft. As for me personally, I graduated from NYU and I went to law school at Michigan. And after that, we opened headquarters in New York City and Queens. And that's what I've been doing the last 2 years.
Hi guys, I'm Alex Garfield. I am the CEO of Evil Geniuses. Evil Geniuses is a top pro team in the community. As a business, it functions more as a general media agency. We wear a lot of hats. We do a lot of different things to provide value to our corporate sponsors, which is a huge source of revenue for us. In terms of how I got involved, I got my bachelor's degree at Pomona College in Claremont. It was in a mix of Black Studies and sociology and kind of like social justice stuff. I also minored in classics, but I began volunteering in esports when I was a sophomore, actually as a writer, and just kind of got the opportunity to create a sponsorship proposal one day because the team I was writing for was kind of going under, and things basically snowballed from there.
Hello everybody, my name is Derek Ortiz. I'm the president and founder of One Nation of Gamers. It's an organization that has BarCrafts across the country and in Europe now. We have 10 locations. My background is I graduated with a computer science degree and a JD from GW. And the way I got started is while I was going through law school, I was a bartender, and I sort of brought BarCrafts to DC, and then I just figured I could sort of reproduce that result all over the country, and that's what we're doing now.
My name is Charles Pratt. I'm an instructor and researcher and administrator at NYU's new Game Center, where we will be offering, I believe it's the first Masters of Fine Arts in Game Development in the fall. I came out of NYU, I got my master's there, and worked as a freelance game designer in New York for several years before being brought on to help start the department. And at a certain point, fell in love with esports, and now I'm doing everything I can at the academic level to help esports grow and become as awesome as we all know it is.
My name is Duran Parsi. I'm the co-head administrator of the Collegiate Star League with Mona over there, and I'm also the head admin of the North American Star League. Before I went to college, undergrad at UC San Diego, majored in political science, and most recently been attending George Washington University in the International Affairs Master's program, but I actually just dropped out in order to pursue a full-time esports life. And just doing what I can to help promote the growth of esports both at the collegiate level and at the professional level.
All right, so to begin, so we all play video games, a lot of us do. We've played Skyrim, Zelda, Nintendo, endless games, but some games just have a certain sort of following, StarCraft 2 being the main one that we're all here for today, I think, League of Legends, Dota. What makes a regular old video game into an electronic sport? And let's go with Charles Pratt on this one for once. In terms of the game design perspective, how is it that so many people watch StarCraft 2, so many people watch League of Legends, that sort of thing?
Well, I mean, I think it's a very particular kind of video game that's going to support spectatorship. Obviously, I think, there are, we can talk about several different kinds of esports, right? Obviously, Counter-Strike is an esport, Street Fighter is an esport, but they're all very different types of games, and some of them I think work better as spectator sports than others. I was talking to Alex beforehand, and we were talking about how, well, no one's really sort of solved the problem of how to broadcast Counter-Strike yet. It's got to be possible. StarCraft as a game has a few things that make it really easy to watch, right? I would say it has sort of focal points that you can always move to as an observer, right? You can look at the armies, hopefully they're crashing into each other, right? You can look at the bases. Something like, a first-person shooter, a 5-on-5, that's 10 different perspectives that the audience has to sort of be able to meld in their head to figure out what's going on in the game. And I think this is one of the things that we can look at, really successful traditional sports, that they also have this quality, right? I think it's no accident that a lot of the major sports tend to have like, a tennis ball or a football, something that's focusing the audience and the teams on a certain point. And so everything else can just be a distraction, right? Whenever you don't know what to look at, where's the ball, and then you know what you're looking at. So I think what's happened is through really sort of a series of wonderful coincidences, StarCraft has gotten as big and as popular as it is, and it does have something to do with the design. It does have something to do with the RTS and why it's just a little bit more watchable than other things. So Street Fighter, right, I think is another one that's very watchable, but maybe fails in the sense that it's very fast, right? It's hard to commentate Street Fighter well, and so maybe that's another reason why. StarCraft 2 is probably the biggest esport, but yeah, so I would say that there's things that make something easier to watch. Any other things?
I mean, I think it's important to recognize that, like, StarCraft 2 arguably is, I think, the title that's most intentionally esports savvy. Like, I was in a panel last week with Mike Morheim, and he said that it was very, very intentional, that it was made to be a big esports game. I think, like, obviously, I don't think Blizzard predicted the success of Brood War as an esport, but certainly going into StarCraft 2, they recognized that they had something and they needed to polish it, and they polished it appropriately. I also think it's like, when people talk about, so when I get asked questions like, well, is StarCraft a real sport? Or, what games are esports and stuff like that, I hate those questions, because I think that a lot of what determines, whether something is a real sport or an esport or whatever is like based on stigmatization and like, you're like me, you're not like me, this is cool, this isn't cool. Because like, if you think about, I don't know, I was asked a question a week ago, like if you think about, two 55-year-old men playing basketball against each other one-on-one, like neither of them are in very good shape, like neither of them are particularly admirable, like they're not going to be your heroes. Like with that act of those two guys playing, like, is that a sport to you guys, or is it just because is it legitimized because it's part of basketball? And if you like start to deconstruct these things, you can see how like whether it's not like people are using objective criteria for what a sport is and a sport isn't. It's more about like what I think is legitimate and what I think is illegitimate. And the same thing happens, esport. Like there are people who say like, oh yeah, well StarCraft is an esport, but like League of Legends, yeah, that's not an esport. Like there are people who say that, and there's like that same inflection of your voice that people would say like, oh, gaming's not a real sport. So it's like we do the same thing to each other when in reality, those are both esports. So it's like, when I get asked those questions, I think it's kind of silly because you're not really talking about anything. So
you feel like it's mostly a status game?
I don't think it's only a status game, but it's certainly largely a status game. Like, if you look around at different cultures, what's considered a real sport, what's not. In certain cultures, chess is considered a real sport. In certain cultures, curling is considered a real sport. And there are people who say that curling isn't a real sport, even though it's in the Olympics. And it's like, okay, well, where exactly is your argument coming from there? And it's really coming from like, oh, well, I don't want this to be associated with what my notion of a real sport is. So it's very much about status.
Just for me personally, what separates something as something I want to watch is, you don't actually have to play a game to like want to watch it. And I think that when it gets to that point when you're a fan and you're not really playing, like I don't play football ever, but I'm a huge NFL fan. And I think that's the case for a lot of people that watch StarCraft. It's a very difficult game to play. And when you see these professionals playing a game physically that you just can't do, a lot of the things they do. And when you can see that represented on screen, that's when it becomes something that's very attractive to viewers. For chess, it's very hard to understand the level of thinking that they're doing. They're just moving the pieces, and there's huge like mental behind it, but you can't really see it. It's not easy to see. For StarCraft, it's easy to see. The professionals that play this game, they do things that we just can't do. And you see that right there, and I think that's what makes it so attractive, as a game.
Eric, you're actually part of the BarCraft movement and a key leader in the East Coast BarCraft movement. What makes people go to bars and watch StarCraft?
Yes, actually, it's just alcohol. Nobody actually watches the screens as much as we try. I think everybody sort of on this panel has sort of explained why esports is attractive to the people it's attractive to. I think because you are gamers and you have some level of understanding of what StarCraft is and how it works, there's a level of appreciation and that sort of manifests itself when you see these sort of like top level players play and sort of hotbed sort of commented on, and it's just something that's like sort of not unique to. It's not unique, it's something that's been happening a long time. We're impressed with like great writers who have sort of like very moving verses, or that athlete that could sort of throw a ball 70 yards accurately. It's just this sort of like this issue of sort of mastery. Anytime sort of somebody sort of puts their heart and everything into something, they often produce very sort of wonderful results, and that's what sort of makes it attractive when you sort of see these players who can sort of manage sort of the game as expertly as they do. It's impressive if you sort of know what's going on, and I think that's the draw. I think the other draw is obviously there's this like level of information asymmetry in the game with StarCraft that's very sort of noticeable. So it's sort of like you get a lot of those like fly ball moments like in baseball where somebody sort of hits a ball, you don't know if it's going to be a home run or not, and then it eventually does. That sort of like suspense and tension builds up frequently in StarCraft games, and I think that's why it's super enjoyable to watch. But also, I think the reason BarCrafts are so popular is because it's sort of spinning that sort of social stigma on its head that like gamers are antisocial, and actually we're seeing that gamers are really social. They just want to hang out with people they feel they have things in common with, and we're sort of seeing that in BarCrafts.
Yeah, I want to echo what Derek said. I think the community aspect of watching StarCraft in a bar, for example, is what makes it so special. I mean, if you look at MLG, for example, it might not have the best games, might not be better than GSL or other tournaments, but the fact that MLG is the most highly attended LAN series makes the games much more exciting, because when you hear other people cheering for StarCraft or getting involved in watching StarCraft, it makes you more passionate about the game. And I think BarCraft is one of the biggest movements, really, that kind of brings that community aspect that you see most often in real sports, and that new avenue of sort of celebrating and getting together with your friends and enjoying games together kind of creates a snowball effect that makes it much more exciting than it would be if you're just watching at home in front of your computer by yourself.
I think you make a really good point, because the notion of like in-person spectatorship and seeing the other people who are rooting for the player you're rooting for, rooting against the player you're rooting for, is like a huge part of spectator culture and a huge part of building an actual sport and building like emotional attachments to the game. Like for example, I think this is why you see events that have an on-site component and a real crowd tend to get many more stream viewers than other events. And I suppose you could argue that those events tend to be the grand finals events that have more prize money anyway. But I personally believe that you would hit a point like, and you would know this as someone who's involved in a league that has a lot of online broadcasts with serious prize money. I think you'd hit a point at which you could like throw all the superlatives and like all the perks and the bells and whistles in the world into an online league. Like you could have it $2 million in prize money, and I don't think like the viewership would increase that much. Like I think what really draws people in the really, really big matches is the concept of the live crowd, and that it's being played in front of other folks.
I mean, MLG's last year had $14,000 in prize pool, which is a fraction of what a lot of other tournaments had. But the fact that they had such big crowds made it much, much more exciting. So it really shows that you don't need to have an astronomical prize pool to generate that excitement. That it really can be kind of self-generated from the fans.
So it's great that all of you are here today, sitting in a lecture hall when you could be doing other things like playing StarCraft 2. So it's great that nowadays we love watching StarCraft, we love going to BarCrafts and everything, but 5 years ago, even 2 years ago, I don't think any of us would have suspected that esports would get as big as it did. And some people nowadays are questioning, 2011 was great, what about 2012? Are we sustainable? What is the current business model that you guys use? Even in ESL, for example, you guys use subscription, and other people use MLG uses pay-per-view. There's been a lot of debate about it. What are your thoughts on the business models that current leagues, current BarCrafts use, and how sustainable are we?
In terms of sustainability, I think the most important thing is to work and find something that would work long term. I don't think we're there yet. I mean, MLG has a good experiment going with the pay-per-view model. I don't think we know how successful it has been yet, but the fact that they're doing 2 arenas in the spring shows that at least it was successful enough that they plan on doubling the amount of content they're going to bring out for the next series. I know IPL has just announced a pay-per-view model, or it's a monthly subscription, sorry, and NASL has done premium passes for Season 1 and Season 2. I think the biggest thing in terms of sustainability is creating a product that can satisfy viewers consistently, and finding out what that price is, that will get people to watch, or what specific things the fans and viewers want to see in order to open up their checkbooks and write checks consistently to different organizations. And also there's a question of the amount of organizations that are out there charging different models, because I'm not sure if a fan, for example, would pay $10 a month to 10 different organizations that are trying to have monthly subscriptions. So I think there's some sort of a level there that would make esports sustainable, and I think this year really is kind of the experimentation with finding out what exactly that point is. And I also think that there is kind of a limit to the number of organizations that can have this sort of a model. If everyone tries to start charging money, I think that's going to be bad for everybody else. So really, we just need to spend this year kind of figuring out what works, and then try to produce content in a way that can satisfy people consistently, that will allow them to continue supporting organizations monetarily.
Actually, I have a question I want to ask the panel, sort of building on this point, is when we're talking about sustainability, right? Okay, so 2011, great year. 2012, how's it going to be? But I mean, for me, especially coming from an academic setting, right, we're sitting in Princeton. What's interesting about being here in Princeton, maybe some of you know, right, is that this is one of the places that football was born, right? One of the biggest, most lucrative sports in the Western world started with a game between Princeton University and Rutgers, about 100 years ago. So what I'm wondering is, when I watch StarCraft, what I'm wondering is what model are you guys what's the 10-year plan? What's the 20-year plan? Is StarCraft and esports going to be sort of always a kind of sort of following the pay-per-view model, right? Is it going to be a lot like MMA, where it's extremely big, but it's still a very focused sort of demographic? Or is there a chance that one of these games, whether it's StarCraft or Street Fighter or Halo even, right? I mean, do you guys sense that there's something that could be sort of even a national game, right? Just sort of a national pastime, 10 years, 20 years down the road?
I mean, I think StarCraft has a really good shot at being that. To kind of address the rest of your question, things are always moving so fast in this industry. It's such a volatile industry, and I think that it's easy to look. You look at a company like Evil Geniuses, and you see mouse pads, you see players being paid a lot of money. You're like, oh well, they could never go under. They would never lose a sponsor, lose all these sponsors. It's actually really fucking hard. Excuse me for the people on the stream. It's really difficult, so it's there's no so the phrase I use is it's really hard to find your balance as a business when the ground underneath you is always moving, and it always moves in this industry. So it's not like we have carved out cookie cutter methods for if you're a team, this is how you make money, and tournaments will always help you with this amount of travel costs, and you're going to have appearance fees coming in here, and you can actually do a value proposition as a team to know that if you spend $1 on travel, you're going to get $2 back in resellable exposure to give to your sponsors. It just doesn't work that way. It's very, very, very fluffy marketing. And so one of the ways that EG has been able to get so many sponsors, it's not because we have a lot of really good players, although that's part of it. Like, I think a lot of people in the community, like, they see the team, they see the players, it's like, it's a really cool sports team. It's like, obviously you would get sponsors. It's like, actually, no, like, not at all. Like, I don't know of a single team ever that's, you know, had a big brand come to them and say, wow, your team is, like, really fucking awesome. Like, can I please give you garbage bags full of money? It never works that way. It just doesn't, because you have to be able to provide these companies with very, very trackable metrics. I talked with a couple guys from the PGA Tour and NASCAR last week, which are two of the most sponsored sports, especially NASCAR. And they track everything up to like the TV rating on an interview with one of their sponsored drivers. They know exactly where their logo is. They can actually, you know, do a calculation for how many brand impressions they're going to get for their dollar overall on a certain player. And I really can't offer, as a team owner, I cannot offer that kind of information to my sponsors because Major League Gaming is not providing me, like we talked about before, they're not providing me with, you know, the number of people who were on the stream when the shot went to the side of the player and the monster logo was right here. Like, it does not work that way. So I can't do deals on a CPM basis. I can't get paid for every impression. I just have to, I'm really good in boardrooms. I'm really good at maintaining relationships. I'm really good at showing value. And this is why you see EG, so what you were talking about when you said I would like talk for way too long. Hotbit always makes fun of me. Like, this is why you see EG, like we do the EG Masters Cup, we do all these different things. We do like so much behind the scenes. We're basically a full-fledged marketing agency. We create websites for our sponsors. We do campaigns like to help them, you know, grow their registered user databases and then we use our player streams to like drive traffic to those microsites and stuff like that. Like, unfortunately, the brand exposure in esports right now is not trackable enough. And then even if it's trackable, most companies actually don't, like, the marketing rep you're going to be dealing with doesn't just need a lot of brand love unless you're, you know, working with like a really, really big brand. Like, they need to sell products and they have their boss right above them that's like constantly grilling them. So you have to like make them feel comfortable, A, that they're going to get more value on sponsoring your team than just buying regular advertisements, and B, that the risk they're taking by telling their boss like, hey, I want to sponsor this gaming team instead of just buying ads, which is what we've been doing for 100 years, is good and not going to get them fired. So as a team, like, that's why I think, you know, my business kind of has tunnel vision to the revenue streams that we have, because even like I could theorize and I think I could come up with a pretty good idea for what an overall breakdown of like how the esports economy is supposed to work, and, you know, how money that comes into a tournament can be redistributed into a mix of prize pool and appearance fees and, you know, team compensation for travel and stuff. But practically it's never going to be executed. So, you know, I think those things are very worthwhile to talk about, but ultimately I think they're academic because it's really, really hard to get so many different entities on the same page in that regard.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm hearing, so from your perspective then, the issue is just that things are still a little too fragile to do that kind of long-term planning.
More than a little too fragile.
Okay, fair enough.
For Team Liquid, we kind of have a unique place because we're a team and a coverage site. It's kind of, we're a little lucky because we don't have any real competitors in that sense. A lot of people visit our site. We're like the hub of StarCraft 2. Recently we've been trying to cover the game like ESPN does, you know, with headlines, with you know, up to the date reporting, and, you know, it's easy to say, but 2010, it was just 2 years ago, we were at 10% the traffic we are now. So it's kind of an increase that's really, really crazy. Like, we didn't even expect it. We thought that StarCraft 2 would be very popular, but it's 10 times increase in the span of, you know, 1 year is really, really crazy. And I don't think a lot of people know this, but even throughout the 10 years that Food War was alive, and still is alive now, we actually grew every single month, even at the tail end of the last of the 8 years. But it was never anything like StarCraft 2, and we thought, you know, why not turn this into something, you know, full time? So now we support 6 full-time employees and 5 part-time employees, but we have 200 volunteers, and that's one of the things that makes our business model really easy to run, because we have people that are passionate and that are willing to, you know, and I think this touches a little bit on question 6, but that they're willing to do these things, you know, just for internal gratification. Like, they're they're happy to do these things, but we can't pay all of our writers. Like, it's not possible to have them on full-time salaries. Like, that's just not something we can do right now. We're a fraction of what ESPN is. Like, it's not even close to compare. So, it's not something that we can really do in terms of sustainability. TL's not going anywhere. We could literally stop working on the site now, and it'll be alive in 5 years, I think. But our job is to just kind of maximize the potential we have. Like, not a lot of startups can be fully self-sufficient the first year that they start. We didn't need any investor money, anything like that. So, we're lucky to have a position like that, and we're just trying to make the most of it.
I'd say with respect to BarCrafts, whether it's sustainable or not, it's a sort of tricky question because you have a lot of competing events. You're competing against like baseball, basketball, football, and it's really just a question of if BarCraft revenue can sort of match, or it's not a question of if BarCraft revenue can sort of match these sports. It's a question of whether it can actually exceed these sports. Because the problem is that like these owners are sort of older people that don't understand gaming at all, and there's this huge sort of anxiety of a lot of owners because they fear sort of disenfranchising their traditional customers by having a BarCraft. It's sort of a lot of pushback I often get when I sort of negotiate with sort of companies that own multiple venues in various cities, or like a GM like that owns sort of one venue. And it's a real problem. So I think with BarCraft, sustainability really depends on sort of like just doing consistently good events. And I guess I'm only speaking in the context of getting like really great upscale public popular bars. You can there's always going to be like a small sort of like run down bar that you can sort of have a BarCraft at with like really bad internet and stuff. But if you want to get like these like central places that are that are like venues that you can be proud that you're there, it's really tough, and it's really important to sort of get the numbers and make sure you're sort of you're meeting the expectations that you're sort of giving those owners. So I don't know if I'm pretty sure it's sustainable as long as the ONAG or other BarCrafts are sort of careful about the events they decide to do a BarCraft for.
There seem to be a lot of community-built organizations where grassroots people who are like eSports, I love eSports, I love growing eSports, are just contributing to all of this movement. One in particular that I was thinking about that Dorian might talk about is the Collegiate Star League. Simply because it started very similarly to Team Liquid in that, we started small, it's all on volunteer work. We don't pay people yet, but eventually I hope we'll move to that direction. Dorian, would you like to comment a little bit about sustainability of something like collegiate esports?
I think that the sort of what Team Liquid has done, or what like our conception of what Team Liquid has done is a good idea to follow. For example, I think building your community and building community loyalty is the most important factor of creating something sustainable. Like the reason Team Liquid has 200 volunteers is because Team Liquid has such a strong community that the people on Team Liquid are proud to represent that organization and are very willing to offer their services for free. And I think any kind of grassroots organization needs to be able to build that if it's to be successful. As Mona pointed out, CSL doesn't take in any money. I've spent a lot of money out of my own pocket to run the events, and every cent that we've taken in has been given out in contests and prize pools and things like that. But I think it's because over the past 3 years we've built a strong following with our community, and we've basically what the CSL has done has basically created micro communities at universities. And I think, as the Waterloo kids in the back would attest to, they've made a lot of friends through their CSL clubs. I have a similar experience at UC San Diego and even at GW, where I've become friends with my teammates, and that has been made possible by the CSL. And I think that loyalty and that excitement has allowed us to be able to get administrators who do a lot of work, like Alan over there in the front, who's awesome. And we rely on that to survive. And I think that it's the most important thing, in my opinion, has been the loyalty and creating a sustainable and strong community.
I think like the whole engagement thing you bring up, and that kind of loyalty with your fans and your community is hugely important. So to actually go back and answer the original question instead of going on like a tangent, what can help to create sustainability is actually having what we as businesses would refer to as direct-to-consumer revenue rather than revenue that's based on clients like sponsors. Because if you're running a business and say you have 10 sponsors or something like that, even in theory, say that they all give you the same amount of money, so it's 10% is coming from each sponsor. If you lose one or two, that's a pretty big cut in revenue. Like especially if your profit margin is not very big, which trust me, there's not a team in the world right now that has a big profit margin. So that's a really, really risky, volatile business model, because one marketing rep gets fired, one new VP comes in and just doesn't like the spend, they'll find a loophole in your contract and they'll terminate it. It's happened to me before. But if you can create a revenue model that's based on actually like fan loyalty, people buying team shirts, this is why like when I do interviews, I profusely thank people for buying our shirts and stuff like that, because if we can actually like forecast revenue based on that, that's something that is much less terrifying to me, because like a consistent fan following lets me do the equation where it's like, hey, if I keep my team pretty good and we keep winning stuff, I can reasonably expect that as long as people keep watching StarCraft, people are going to keep buying this merchandise. It's a really big deal. Another thing, like with regard to the kind of relationships that esports entities have with their fans, which I think is different from what pro sports teams do, is I feel like with big business and pro sports teams, there's like this wall where it's like they want to look at themselves as a business, and the fans are the fans, and it's like, well, we're going to spend this much money on players, and like the fans are going to buy tickets based on that. It's not like there's actual engagement, and I feel like in esports we don't have that wall as much. I think that people in the esports community, at least in the StarCraft community, have a tremendous feeling of like ownership over the kind of content they watch, like Day9's relationship with his viewers, for example, and like EG's relationship with its fans. Like if you think about a pro sports team, rarely do you see a pro sports team say like, well, if we get this many ticket sales this year, we'll have enough money to sign Albert Pujols. Like they just don't do that. They don't cross that line, and we don't go quite that far. But I feel like with things like Sean Day9 talks a lot about the concept of the voluntary subscription, which you almost never see in other places, but it's what I think he does and what other entities in this space do. And it actually works because there's a level of engagement that we allow so that our fans feel a certain amount of ownership over what has been mutually created. And it's not an illusion, because it's very much been mutually created, in my opinion. And I actually don't see that as being very different from how real sports teams operate. It's just that I think like the presidents and the CEOs and the owners of those teams, I think they don't like to think that way. They like to think that there's a wall between them and their fans. And we don't have to think that way in esports.
I've always said that for us, our biggest asset is not the ad impressions we get or anything. It's the reputation that we have with our community. That's because I feel that we treat the users that visit TL. I think we're on like 300,000 registered accounts now and 14 million posts. Our users, we treat them with a level of respect. I think that like we don't ask for donations, we don't ask for anything. We just want them to visit and enjoy TL and be a good member. And I think that that's important, because you have a limited pool to draw on when it comes to revenue from people. You can't always ask them to support this, support that, do this, because eventually that runs out. It's a very limited thing. Like I supported Team Liquid, I bought this thing, now they're asking me to do this, now they're asking me to do that. You can only do so many things. So we feel that when you really want them to support something, then you ask. And I think that really shows with our merchandising sales too. When we release something, it's usually sold out very quickly, and I think that's because we don't really ask our users to do a lot of things. And that's why we don't, we're not so rah-rah support esports, do this, do that. We kind of just want to, if we really want to get behind something, then we'll do that. I think I have a funny story with Scott, your CEO. I remember watching MLG with him, and there was a fan who was wearing an EG shirt, and he was watching a match between a Liquid player and an EG player, and he got the shirt signed by the EG player, and then at the end of the match, he switched shirts. He went to the Liquid player and he got it signed too. And I was making fun of Scott a little bit. I was like, he switched to our shirt. But the bottom line is he bought both shirts, which is great for both teams, because it shows that he, you don't see a lot of people buying an Eagles jersey and a Giants jersey. That just doesn't happen often. So I think that it just shows that it is something that's sustainable, that people really feel loyalty, and you even have fans like that do multiple purchases. So I think it's just a good situation for both of us.
So how many people out here have an eSports shirt? Yeah, that's what I thought. Great. So actually, the community looks like it's really supportive of eSports in general, but at times we do have a certain reputation for using offensive language, offensive behavior. I mean, it comes with this video game culture that we come from. Sometimes it's okay to trash talk people, but sometimes it gets a little out of hand. So eSports is getting more professionalized day by day, and we expect more and more out of all our teams, out of all our news coverage sites. How do we balance between professionalism and just wanting to have a little good-natured trash talking?
Well, I think that our website has TL has a reputation of being very strict in terms of moderating. I think we have, actually in law school, I was called on by the teacher in my new media class about the website to ask how many people we banned. And I said, at the time, I think it was 2008, we had 30,000 bans or something. So, yeah, so it's a crazy amount of people, but I think that, if we were to say we want those people on the site, I don't think that's not a good thing, because we want the site to be people treating as if they would in real life. That's the ultimate goal. Obviously, we're not there yet. People insult each other all the time, but I think that since we are kind of a hub of discussion, we want to make it so that the rules are enforced in a way that people feel at home, they feel at ease. And so, for example, we don't allow racial slurs or anything like that. It's just instantaneous, no questions asked, you're gone. And I think that, especially for stuff like sexist jokes, we've seen a substantial increase in female players posting on our website since we've become more strict with that. So I think that there's a lot of room there, and I think we just want to just keep pushing it, keep moving. I think one of the things right now that's a hot button issue is the use of the word gay. I think a lot of people use it online as just an insult, and we're starting to warn and ban for that too. And I think that by slowly going step by step, we can create an atmosphere for StarCraft that the StarCraft community can be seen by others as wow, these people are really polite to each other. I think the fighting game community and other games are just how are they so nice to each other? And I hope that our rules contribute at least a little bit to it. So.
I think I'd like to address this issue more in reactionary fashion, because I'm sure there are going to be some questions from you guys at the end. This obviously pertains to several EG players and some recent news. So, I think I'll address it that way, unless you guys want to, I don't know, frame the discussion.
Just a quick note. I think one of the differences between esports and real sports is, there's a lot of trash talking that goes on in real sports, except the difference is that on in real sports, their players are talking trash to each other, on a basketball court, for example, so nobody hears it. The difference, obviously, with esports, you're typing it, so any a million people who are watching, screenshot and then post the screenshots and start laughing about it on the forums. And so I think the closeness that esports has to the fans has made this a significant issue. I'm sure football players say much worse things than a lot of people in esports do, but nobody really knows about it except when they heckle fans, which happens rarely. So I think it's not necessarily a matter of trash talking. It's just kind of realizing the setting that you're in that, especially in esports, when you're at MLGs, you're 2 steps away from fans. They can hear everything you're saying. When you're typing to somebody, that there's a ton of people who could be screenshotting everything you're saying. So it's just being aware of kind of the setting that you're in and how you should be behaving, because in esports you're really always in a public setting. Whereas in more traditional sports, when you're in the public, obviously you censor what you say, but on the court, most players don't. I'm sure I've never been courtside at a basketball game, but I'm sure anyone who I've heard that people who are at courtside, hear all the trash talk from players, and it gets pretty bad sometimes. So it's just being more aware of kind of where you're at and how public esports is in general.
I actually just wanted to comment because I think this is really important, and I think the sort of efforts that Team Liquid have taken are really important, and I do think that, like, interestingly, StarCraft, this is less of a problem. Current events notwithstanding, but this is less of a problem than it is for something like the Street Fighter community or the fighting game community, which also just recently had a big controversy. And I think it's important to sort of say what kind of progress we're making, but in a lot of the times when I observe the conversations that are happening in a lot of different esports communities, the stakes don't get brought up as much as I think is important, right? And the stakes really are, I think, very high. And I think that to a certain extent, especially with the fighting game community, this is almost the dark side of communities, of games being wrapped up so much in just their existing community. And I think that the thing to remember is it's important not just, from the perspective of social justice, right? Just wanting to be part of the 21st century and a conversation that extends outside of our own communities, no matter how much we love those communities. But also that if what is really at stake are the games, and I think that what we're all here for is the game, right? The community is important, but their community is built around these games that we love, and we love playing, and we love watching people play them on a high level. And I think what sometimes gets missed is that the more people that love this game, the more people that feel comfortable joining these communities and enjoying these games with us, the better the play is actually going to get, right? The more often someone says, you know what, I want to take up StarCraft. I'm going to practice that for 12 hours a day. The more people on Earth who feel comfortable doing that, then the more we're going to see the sort of like, the MVPs, right? We're going to see, I'm a big MMA fan, so the more we're going to see MMA. And the next MVP or MMA might be someone that we're not used to seeing, right? It might be someone that we don't necessarily recognize as being part of the community now. So I think that's the other thing that's really important to remember, is that there's stuff that's at stake that we don't necessarily often talk about.
And I mean, I'd say StarCraft has a little, is fortunate in that the fans, a lot of them skew older than the other games. I think that the fighting game community and the first-person shooters, a lot of them have teenagers that are in high school or middle school even. And StarCraft, a lot of the fans, they've been a fan of Brood War since 1998. Our website age is like, the majority is above 18 to 26. A lot of college students, just out of college. And I think that's valuable to advertising standpoint too. But just that they're older and they're more mature, they've already gotten all that out of their system. The trash talking on the ladder. That it's just a more welcoming atmosphere. And you just need one bad experience that will turn you off from a game. If you're playing your first game in bronze and your first 4 people are just insulting you for whatever you're doing, you're just going to stop playing. You're not going to give it another chance. So I think that it's very important for the community to be very receptive right away. It just takes one bad person, one jerk, to ruin someone's experience.
Hey, that's me. Watch out. No, I agree, because I think that this is why I think the effort that Team Liquid is making is so good, because especially in the Street Fighter community and the shooter community, where the age is skewing younger, right? That it's more important that the organizations that are really respected take a stand. I was really happy to see that Shoryuken sort of stood up and said that the sort of stuff that went on at Cross Assault, I don't know how many people are familiar with what went down, right? That they were that this was not appropriate. That professionalism is something that should be valued, and respecting other players, no matter who they are, is something that Shoryuken, as a website, as a center of the community, cared about. I think that was really important. I honestly wish Capcom had come out with some stronger comments than they did. I think, when you have players, right, and we all make mistakes.
Briefly just say what it was.
Oh, so, well, it was several things. There was an unfortunate exchange between I guess, Jared Rea of Twitch. Is that how you pronounce his last name? And a guy named Aros Bakhtanian, who's an important. Is that not how you pronounce his name?
I just like how the second one was like way more difficult to pronounce than the first, and you breezed through it like it was nothing.
So Bakhtanian is an important member of the fighting game community. He got into an argument with Jared, who I guess. By the way, the one thing you want to do to piss off a Street Fighter player is suggest that StarCraft players are more polite than they are, and you'd rather hang out with them. That won't really get out of their skin. And suggested, what's that?
It's true.
It is true. Well, basically, so I think Bakhtanian made the unfortunate statement that sexual harassment was just an inextricable part of the fighting game community, and he has backed off some from that, basically saying that what he meant was the sort of trash talking that the fighting game community is really invested in. I think probably even more than the StarCraft community. Was important. And then it came out that he had been, basically, it was on the stream, right? It was on the stream that was going out to everyone on Team Spooky, sponsored by Capcom. This sort of really horrifying, when you actually watch it all, sort of sexual harassment of one of the female players, right? I mean, it was nothing really lewd, but it was just consistent and days on end. And it was something that, like, you could have been, they call them stream monsters in Street Fighter, right? Like, you could be a stream monster and think, oh, well, that's just joking, right? That's just. But in the end, the female competitor was just worn down. She actually forfeited her last couple of fights and walked out, right? And that's been a big controversy in the Street Fighter community and in the fighting game community in general.
I mean, I think that if you try to like put together a formula for what actually defines a community's cultural values, it's fairly murky, right? I mean, there's some entities that actually have like tangible power over it. Like a website and its moderation practices. That's an actual tangible effect on what people can and can't say. Not so much in terms of censorship, but just like what the overall values of the community are. Then you have what certain figureheads say and do. Like, once again, I'm expecting questions about this later. And so all these different things kind of combine overall to define like what a community's values are, I suppose. So it's not like any of us are sitting around a room saying like, well, we feel like like our community should have X and Y values. It just kind of happens, and that's why these kind of things are, I think, fairly authentic. And I noticed in the community's reaction to that whole debacle with the cross assault thing, like the overarching sentiment that I got from the community was like people felt like that's part of what made the fighting community what it was. It's like the reaction was more like, this is part of what creates the environment that we know and love, which is like, I think, almost the exact opposite of, I mean, I don't know if anybody read the TL post that I made yesterday, but one of the things I said in it was that I was actually like very, very, very encouraged by the community's outrage at what was said by Orb, obviously. Because if you compare that to what the fighting games community, what their reaction was, their reaction is like, no, this is actually, we like our community and this is what makes us who we are, like, which is the polar opposite of, this is actually fucking unacceptable.
Yeah, I'm going to stick up for the fighting game community a little bit. I mean, I think it was split, and but I think you are right. I think with the fighting game community, probably for the reasons that Ken was suggesting, right, was that the people who were older, right, the people who are sort of the people running the community sites, people like Seth Killian, right, who's the community manager at Capcom, they were coming out and saying, this is inappropriate, we can't have this. And the people on the stream maybe were not properly, even players, I think, were coming out and saying, we're not doing this anymore, right, we're professionals.
But to be honest, I was very disappointed that there wasn't more tangible action taken, like from the people who were actually putting on that show and producing that show, because I think like that's one of the best signifiers for what a community's values really are. Is the guy going to get fired? Like that's what happens, for the ESPN thing with Jeremy Lin a couple weeks ago. If you do that, you fucking get fired. Like, and I think a lot of people were saying, before we announced what we were going to do, like, if you don't get rid of this guy, people are not going to take esports seriously.
Sorry to interrupt a bit, but could you describe the incident with Orb?
Yeah, I mean, so essentially what happened was we contracted Orb to do some Masters Cup broadcasts for us. He was living in the EG house in Phoenix, which is really close to our studio. And then basically, via Reddit, people discovered that he had used the N-word not in broadcast that had happened while he was necessarily at the house, certainly not in actual Masters Cup broadcast, but in ladder games that had been streamed, in ladder games that had been unstreamed, stuff like that. And I think that's a fairly good description of what happened. So, once again, part of the reaction was, how can you expect people to take esports seriously if this is not treated like it's a real sport? Now, I will maintain that the decision that I made was more based on, I think, what I felt was right and wrong. I don't view this as a situation in which, a Reddit witch hunt was, successful in getting what it wanted. I really, really don't.
Just to be clear, he would be fired.
Yeah, I mean, yesterday part of the TL announcement was that I fired the guy. But in that regard, I was so disappointed that there wasn't action taken, because there's just such a big difference between wagging a finger and figureheads coming out and saying this is unacceptable and actually fucking firing someone. Excuse my language again, but this is something that is it's so significant to me as someone I've been arguing with people over cultural values in esports for almost a decade now, going back to Counter-Strike. If you guys have the chance to read my TL post, I open it by referencing a situation that happened back in 2003 where they were basically five or seven kids from Southern California who were white and Asian, and they just decided that they wanted to pretend to be black for a whole season in Cal Maine. And they did, and they were good players, so people were like, well, where does this team come from? And I'm sitting, I'm getting ready to go to class, in the Black Studies department in Pomona to talk about whiteness. I'm this is amazing, about time, that there's they're awesome, this is great. And then it's just a massive troll. They get exposed at the end of the season after winning Cal Maine, and they're just they're having a blast. And the community's response to this is it's not oh my god, this is unacceptable. The community's response was, you guys are hilarious, how'd you pull this off? And I'm sitting at my computer with my jaw on the floor, I'm what the fuck is this? And I write a post on Godfrag to pretty much say that, and I was never expecting my post on Godfrag, which is only a page long and ended with is there anyone else who thinks this is not okay, to be received controversially. But that sentiment was hey man, this actually might not be okay. It was controversial to the community. And then I realized wow, the values just are not there.
And I completely agree with your point about that harsher action should have been taken. I honestly believe that this is, so look, there is football has the NFL, right? And this is something that esports doesn't have right now, right? This sort of giant, powerful governing body that can sort of lay down these rules. What it does have is major corporations, though, right? Capcom and Blizzard are pouring a lot of money into tournaments and pouring a lot of money into the scene, hoping to grow this, right? I think part of Blizzard's idea is maybe someday they can be the NFL of StarCraft. Wouldn't that be incredibly lucrative and awesome? But they're kind of not stepping up, right? Capcom could say, we're not giving money to any tournament that doesn't have a very clear zero tolerance policy about harassment, and neither is Blizzard.
It would be a wonderful world. I created, this is literally 10 years ago, so I'm going to try and remember, but for Cal, which was the biggest online league for Counter-Strike back in the day, Cyber, the amateur league, I created in my man, it's just so naive to think they would actually have taken the proposal, but I created this 4 or 5 page proposal, and I emailed it to Frank Nuccio, who was the commissioner at that time, and I was here's this replay review system that you can apply in Cal Invite and Cal Premier, and it will prevent people from just using racial slurs, in MM1. I think that's a basic goal that we can all agree with. And he was yeah, too much legwork. It's just you get one of those corporate brush-offs. They're worried about creating a monetizable product. So I agree with you. I wish that there would be more policies like that. And the simple fact is that in operating this space, the developer is kind of like the elephant in the room, because as soon as Blizzard or Capcom or whatever just decides to care more about the industry, not in the sense that they're neglecting it, but to focus more on a particular aspect, things can change so fast. If Riot decided that they wanted to take a cut of player stream revenue, to make it a viable economy that way, they could do that. I don't think they're going to, but you're not really talking about the developer influence when you participate in this industry, but it's just something that's kind of hovering in the room. It's well, at any point, this is not like basketball. Somebody actually owns the IP to this game that we're all making money off of, in theory. So,
yeah, I mean, just about the specific issue, about people saying, it's just part of the community. I would say that one of the main goals for any game community is to introduce more casuals to the game so that they can, participate, they can become fans, they can become great players. And I don't know if you guys know this, but StarCraft community, at least the users on TL, but we're 98.5% male, something like that. So the #1 growth area really is players. It's half the population really easy. I mean, like, it makes no sense why you would want to alienate such a large growth area. So just the fighting community, especially. I mean, like, it should be every player's kind of goal to try and get more casuals that way. Is the easiest place to expand. So in terms of like an overarching organization that can actually impose penalties on players that or people that do use offensive language or any other kind of thing, that's not really possible in StarCraft right now. Hopefully it is eventually, but the amount of time and effort that it would take to properly review cases, to have appeals, to do all that kind of thing, it's just so difficult. I mean, we're so far away from. It'd be a full-time job for like 10 people, essentially, and we just it's not possible.
I'm actually really sad we don't have a League of Legends person up here. I'm sure they would have an even more unique idea about this.
Yeah, it's just you don't have power over these organizations. Like, how can you really say like this player is going to be banned from MLG, DreamHack, Asus, all that kind of stuff without a corporation that actually has, or an organization that has teeth with all of them? You can just kind of say MLG please ban him. He said that word, but like you really have no influence over it unless
it's the same reason you can't really establish a viable infrastructure for all the other all the other things related to like an esports economy and any kind of standardized appearance fee for players and stuff like that. It's really, I mean, I think the developer is ultimately there are a couple ways that an organization like that can be formed to have actual teeth, but like the most straightforward one is for the developer to step in and be like, okay, we're going to start some kind of governing body, and we own this game, so we're going to enforce it.
Yeah, you just kind of hope that the organizations do the right thing in that kind of situation, but thankfully it hasn't really come up, in StarCraft yet. But I assume it will eventually.
It seems like as StarCraft is becoming more legitimate in the world, or the eyes of the world, we're running into this problem, I guess, of just becoming more professional, and we want to become like sports, but in some ways sports also could learn a few lessons from us. And I was wondering, what do you think electronic sports has to offer, in terms of business models, in terms of things that we've learned through our experiences to other industries and companies? For example, BarCrafts, I've heard, are extremely, extremely popular on Sunday nights, a night when bar owners are just ecstatic that even people are going there. How can we learn from each other even and just keep this going?
I guess one lesson that real sports could adopt from esports, I think live streaming is something that sports doesn't do very often, but they are obviously starting to. I know like NBA League Pass is a great idea, but I mean even things like streaming your team practices, different sort of things like that to get more community and fan involvement with your favorite teams. I think that's a pretty cool thing that sports teams could be implementing that they currently are not. Yeah, that would be my primary thing.
I mean, just to say that, I think that live streaming is a blessing and a curse for these tournaments. I think that it creates a lot of interest. People watch all the time. It also creates a situation where you have, if Michael Jordan is playing 5-on-5s all day, streaming it, it's very difficult to package and actually playing in games. You can just watch him playing just like all the time. I mean, I know the stakes are different, but there is someone out there who's a fan that watches, MC stream, and then is not as excited about, two players playing in the league. I think that, we had an issue with Korean teams restricting streaming before, and it's kind of protecting the broadcast organizations, because if you stream too many in-house practice matches, that becomes a substitute for the actual tournament. And I think that that's something that's a line that people have to toe a little bit. for the interests of the streamer who wants to make money versus the tournament that wants to have a unique product.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I guess a recent like Boxer streaming, for example. Boxer's obviously a legendary player, but when you can watch Boxer every day streaming for 5 hours a day, it's much less special than if he only streamed once a month or something, or if you only participated in tournaments and you knew there was only one way you get to watch Boxer. I guess there's some sort of balance that needs to be found.
I think that mainstream sports and other industries could probably learn from the way that we engage our fans. Like I said before, I think people put up a wall. They don't make use of social media and other kinds of technologies that really allow you to have good engagement with your fans. And I think we really do an excellent job of that. I also think that you have to remember that a lot of people at the big media companies and broadcasting entities are still living in a world where they think that people watch television. And at least when I look at our demographic, I assume that the person either gets their content on the computer and also has a TV or only has a computer. Just because I feel like everyone in this room probably knows how to get whatever TV show they want in a torrent or something like that, or on Hulu or whatever. I personally canceled my DirecTV a month ago because I didn't need it. And I think that over the next 10 or 20 years we're going to see a drastic shift in how people consume media and stuff like that. I don't think that mainstream sports are fully on board with that reality. Certainly not cable companies and media companies. But what they are seeing is that in order to actually keep people on subscriptions, they need to do more and more live events that people can't get on the computer. That's actually a huge push for people at big cable companies like Comcast and stuff like that, and networks and stuff, is they want more and more unique live events because they're finding that people, there's still traction in having people watch those on real TV as opposed to watching them online because they're much less available.
I mean, I think that example is really good relating to the music industry, where really the majority of the revenue from music is generated through live performances and concerts now, whereas maybe 5-10 years ago it was a lot through CD sales and things like that. So I definitely think that that's a great point.
So the last question actually for today would be a very relevant question to I think all of you, and that's what kind of advice would you give to someone looking into going into esports? And that's kind of an ambiguous sort of thing, but basically going into the administrative, the organizational, the professional level of esports. How would you suggest that all of these people begin to contribute to it? A lot of different organizations right now, with BarCraft, they're all going about CSL. What do you do to make a career out of it?
Well, first I would try and talk you out of it. That's what I do for anyone that asks us about law school too. I try and talk them out of it, and I really try to talk them out of it. And if they still want to do it after I give them all the horror stories about it, then okay, you can try it. But it's really, really hard to have a full-time job in this industry because I think I read something about Mark Cuban said at Sloan that this room is filled with sports management majors, and everyone wants to be in the front office of whatever pro sports team. That's their dream job. And he said, don't do it. It's impossible because there's thousands of people willing to take this spot. They're trying to pay me money to intern for the Mavericks, stuff like that. I think that our industry is like a million times smaller than that, and we only have so many full-time positions available, and it's a combination of skills, hard work, and a ton of luck. For TL personally, we're extremely lucky to be established so long ago and just have a very stable assets in place when we decided to open an office and do all that kind of stuff. We're incredibly fortunate to do that, and we support less than 10 full-time employees. So, if you think about it that way, our positioning as a new business was as optimal as we can get. It's pretty hard to just stop what you're doing, and you have to have a pretty amazing idea to be able to do something, go into it full time. It requires a lot of sacrifice, a lot of hard work. You're not going to make a ton of money. You are going to love what you do every day in the morning, and I think that's like the number one thing for why doing this is great. But it's just so hard. I don't really know what to say to you other than to work really hard and have an amazing idea. But yeah.
I think that if you want to work for an already established entity, you have to start off as a volunteer. I have a number of people who are full time. Not a single one was picked out without having already volunteered for me for 1 or 2 years. I think that's the biggest way. It's like if you have value to bring to a company, you'll show it over time. Like we're just, for the most part, I know there's like a sponsored Reddit thread that NASL is hiring, but I think for the most part, like esports companies are kind of like struggling and fighting to stay alive and stay afloat. So it's like if there's going to be money that's left over to give more people salaries, it's going to go to the people who help them get there. Like right now I have like a laundry list of people who should probably get paid more, like on for their hours, and if they were not in esports, they would get paid more. And I need to as the owner of a company, I need to take care of those before I just go and like randomly give someone who knew a full-time job. It just doesn't work that way.
I mean, I started out as a volunteer writing for TL in 2005, and I went to school. I never really intended to, do this full time. And I think that, you have to really just be willing to do it for its own sake, being rewarding. If I didn't want to just write for TL and spend however many hours a week recapping games and like writing editorials, I didn't expect to eventually, be in a place where my full-time job is this. I just thought, I'm going to write this. This is awesome. People are reading what I'm writing, and that's all I wanted. If you go into it with the goal of like, I want to make money out of this eventually, that's not going to work, because you are going to just burn out so fast, and you're going to be bitter and disappointed, and you're just not going to be happy. You want to be able to say, I'm doing this. I really enjoy doing it, and whatever comes of it, I'm going to work hard. Whatever comes, and if I get a full-time job, great.
You're so morbid.
I know. I don't want to be too optimistic. I don't want to be like, follow your dreams, and then people like go do it, and like that Asian kid told me to do it. And I did it, and now I'm unemployed.
Edward StarCraft told me to get a career in esports.
Right.
I love that joke. I started as a volunteer as well. I volunteered for EG. I wrote for the website when there was a different, head of the company, when it was 5 guys playing Counter-Strike and they were all from Canada. And then, the manager was kind of shady, and they were like, oh, well, I guess we're just going to quit because we're not going to get any more sponsors. And I was like, no, I'll find you a sponsor. They're like, oh yeah, sure man, sure, editor-in-chief of our website, which never actually came out because I was like sitting on 20 articles in MS Word form were never published because the manager just didn't get things done. And then these opportunities, especially in emerging industry, like they're there. And if you do valuable work, like you will get more responsibility in a relatively short period of time, 3 months, 6 months, year, whatever it may be. And then if your entity grows and you have more responsibility, you're gonna be rewarded, I think. But I don't look at it quite as bleakly as Ken does, but I think that especially knowing that a lot of the already established entities are like really fighting hard to stay alive, probably more than people know. It is kind of difficult to get a full-time job, but the way to start is definitely volunteer and move up and show valuable work.
Yeah, I definitely agree with both Alex and Ken. I mean, I started administering tournaments on WGTour.com like 6-7 years ago, and it just takes a lot of passion, and I would definitely not recommend people give up like school or work in order to do esports, just because it's so difficult to make a consistent living on it. So if you're kind of banking on doing that, I think you're a little bit misguided because it's just so difficult. And just in general, I would always recommend staying in school and join your CSL team and make lots of friends. And then if you're really passionate about esports, as Alex and Ken have both said, you'll eventually get to a position where you're at least making something. And I think that as esports grows, and hopefully we're all hoping that it gets to a level where every one of the employees of your organization can be making salary. Like, every writer at ESPN is most of them are full-time. They get regular paychecks and they can afford to pay their bills with their salary from writing for sports. And I think everyone hopes that esports will get to that level as well, but it's just, being a little bit realistic and not trying to give up everything in order to reach that, just because if it doesn't get there ever, then you're going to be fairly disappointed. But if you're really passionate about it, then as long as you're not giving up your whole life, I think I'd say go for it.
Yeah, I mean the ground, as you said, the ground is shifting. With the NBA lockout, a lot of employees of the NBA teams felt that for a few months too, and they were not sure. Our industry is even more volatile than that. So yeah, a backup plan is super important. But I don't want to be too negative. So I can talk a little bit about how positive it is. I mean, it's working for TL. It's hard to even separate work and play because we enjoy it so much that I have to stop myself from working too much and trying to enjoy myself a little bit more in non-StarCraft things, because I like watching streams, I like reporting on stuff, so I could spend 100 hours a week doing this if I wanted, just because this is what I would be doing if I was a lawyer. As a normal path would go after you graduate from law school and take the bar. I would be doing this in my free time, 2 hours of free time I would have. But yeah, so it is really, really, really fun. You love getting up in the morning and going to work.
I guess I would say on a positive note, I started One Nation of Gamers. I guess it's a business and it's fine. It is a lot of work, but obviously I'm passionate about esports, so I don't mind doing it. The way I did it is when I left law school, I knew I sort of, wanted to sort of start my own business related to gaming. And so what I did is I looked for the job that would offer me the most flexibility. So I have a job, I'm a patent examiner, and I can make my own hours, and that allows me to actually sort of do this business. So if you want to do esports, if you know your passion's in esports, I would suggest maybe think about that. Maybe there's a job that you could do, just to do, that'll sort of keep you afloat. That's sort of flexible, and then because of that flexibility, it's going to allow you to sort of pursue your passion. So that actually has a lot of value.
I'll say that EG is accepting internships right now. So for anyone here or anyone on stream, you can email me a resume, alex@myig.net.
Yeah, on the academic level, games and music are similar in that they have a long history of destroying young lives. But I think actually what's interesting is if you look at more traditional sports can be a way for people who might actually not have had a clear path to higher education to have a path. And so one of the things that one of my ambitions once the Game Center is around, once we get our first class of master students is to start basically petitioning the athletic department to recognize our StarCraft team as an actual school team and maybe someday get funding for it. So if you're a college student and you love esports, I think one of the ways you can help is if you don't have a team, form a team, start competing, and after you've done that, start bothering your administration about getting funding and supporting you as an athletic institution, because I think you deserve it just as much as the basketball players and certainly just as much as the swimmers. So, that's, yeah, so.
All right, we're going to wrap up this closed question section of the panel discussion, and we're going to open up to the floor, and there will actually be a microphone walking around. So if we can start getting some hands, we'll get the microphone over to you. Should we just start with that? Can you project in the white shirt?
Yeah. So I think this is a question for Mr. Garfield, but also for Confid a little bit. I think a really important part of marketing your team and marketing your players is establishing identities for the players. So I guess I just sort of bad boy, Liquid Chef, and now the Manor Bear kind of thing. So those are the polar opposites. But specifically for Mr. Garfield, a big part of IG's popularity, I think, comes from his quote unquote bad manner. One of the most popular videos on YouTube related to StarCraft is Hydra in a nutshell, which is just 7 minutes of him calling people bad and calling people retarded for 7 minutes, and it's hilarious. I've watched it 10 times. I love it. I'm not the biggest Hydra fan, but I watch that video a lot. How do you reconcile the clear profit that EG gets as an organization from some of its players, bad manners, and some of its players characteristics like that, with EG's very strict stance on what work did? Those seem to be related, but you take very polar opposite stances on them.
Yeah. So to first comment on the notion of good manner, bad manner, and something you said earlier, where I think you were talking about you wanted to fostering a polite community and stuff like that. I don't want to
Yeah.
put words in your mouth, but
I mean, I said that, but I also don't mean that the players don't have to be humans.
Right.
I mean,
so
yeah.
to
Like, anger is part of, personality of people. I think people relate to them not because of the rage, but because of the human side of it.
So there's no like scheming on my part as a team owner to like define identities of players. Like I've always just kind of let players be players. And with regard to Greg, like talking shit to people, whether it's in a match or it's on stage or it's on stream, I think it's fine because it's who he is. Now, what the vocabulary that's acceptable for use there is a completely different story. So if he's on stream and he calls someone a fucking idiot, and like that's who he is, like I think that there's a role for someone like that in our community. It's not like anyone had like was puppeteering and was like, okay, well Chef's gonna be like, Chef's gonna be good and Idra's gonna be bad. It kind of happens because as we have a more robust community, we get different kinds of personalities. However, you make a very very apt point in terms of where is the line between like just being a jerk and saying something that's unacceptable. And my whole point is that you don't need to use that kind of vocabulary to get your point across. I don't think anybody does. So every time he's used FAGGOT on stream, he's heard from me, and at least to my knowledge, as of late, it's stopped completely. And what I said to people on Twitter yesterday when they pointed that stuff out to me is like, you can link me to something if it's happened recently. I'll do something about it. I'm sure there'll be other questions about that too. But I think that the players being themselves is part of what makes our sport great. You have to worry about that kind of language less when the players are like in the good guy camp. But even for those who are in the bad guy camp, like it's fine with him being him as long as he doesn't use particular words.
Yeah, I actually this links back, I think, to the issue that happened with the fighting game community and what happened at Cross Assault is part of the problem the fighting game community has right now is that they can't tell the difference between bad manners and abuse, right? Like bad manners is, I don't want Street Fighter without trash talk. I do, however, want Street Fighter without sexual harassment, and I actually think that that's a clearer line than we sometimes talk about it. So.
To get back to the first part of your question, where you said, do you want players with defined personalities? I would say that putting on my team hat for Liquid, being a professional gamer is not something that's super lucrative, at least not for everyone but the very few that are at the top. I think that, the philosophy behind the Liquid players is that we want our players to be relevant and to be popular and to be successful, even if they are not winning tournaments. I think that's something that's a huge advantage to being on our team, and I think to being on BG as well. You still kind of feel that these players are in the community and relevant, even though they might not be having the greatest results recently. And when they do have the greatest results, it really maximizes their potential to become a star. And I think that opportunity there is very important for a professional gamer, because this isn't the most stable, profession. They're not planning to be a professional gamer for 30 years. Their window is very small. So I think it's very important to establish a personality for a player, to have them get fans, to have them get stream viewers, to have them do all this stuff that makes them capable of, being a successful pro gamer when they're not winning these super competitive tournaments. Because not everyone can win GSL. It's just too hard to do.
I think that having a defined personality is a key part of engaging with fans. And in terms of the way we recruit, I look for players who are marketable, players who are popular, and players who win. And especially, I think what would kind of best describe my recruiting style is that I would like to have a group of players for which if any of those players were to go and win a tournament and start winning like crazy, they would have the potential to blow up into a massive superstar, which is just not the case with every player. You can think, of examples of certain players who maybe don't have as intriguing of a personality, as defined of a personality, and they can win all they want, but they're not gonna be a mega superstar. And I feel like with my StarCraft team, if any of those guys start winning lots and lots of tournaments who aren't right now, they would blow up really big. Because it's not necessarily because they all have the same kind of personality, it's because they have defined personalities just because of who they are.
and just to add to that, regular sports, you see the player's face, you see their expressions, you see them in interviews. You don't see Chef on stream in his play. So it's very important to have a defined personality, even more so than regular sports.
Great, thank you. Do we have another question in the audience? I think this guy in the Team Liquid shirt.
Thank you for purchasing the shirt.
Oh, I just wanted to mention that we're going to take a page out of the social media networking book, and if you tweet at @CStarLeague with questions and you're one of our online audience members, we'll take your questions as well, so please do so.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a little bit more on an issue that we've touched about that's been on the back burner for a really long time in the video game community, and that's the issue of demographics and diversity that we've touched about. And basically, if you look around this room, if you look around the players, you see, white guys and Asian guys. And we all, okay, and Jason. And so we all agreed that we want to bring in more casual players, we want to bring in a more diverse audience, but is it advisable to go into more sort of active roles, or sort of I don't know about a affirmative action thing? And we've seen examples of in other games. For example, in Counter-Strike, you have all-female teams, all-female tournaments, for example. Is that a kind of a route that might be possible in StarCraft, or advisable at all, or is it better to just invite, for example, females into the regular teams and just hope that they start competing more in the all-male tournaments? I mean, what's your guys' perspective?
I would say that the all-female tournaments are really, really awesome. I think that, the first thing that when we have those threads on TL is people arguing, is this reverse gender discrimination? How come there isn't an all-male tournament? It's well, are you an idiot? We are trying to, an underrepresented minority in our community, a space. We're giving them a space to compete with each other and meet each other and try and get more into it. I don't see how an all-female tournament or is anything different than a Canadian tournament or a tournament that's limited to just Masters players. I think that by having places where you can have people become more interested in the game with people that are like-minded, similar interests, then that's great. I think it was the Zowie Divina tournament. I think it was the one where they flew
in China.
10 female players. We covered that. We love that tournament. I hope they do more.
So are you proposing, obviously asking a general question about these kinds of events, but are you suggesting that instead of just having all female tournaments at some points, there should be other tournaments where it could be underrepresented racial groups as well? Is that what you're suggesting, or just asking a general question? Well, first of all, I agree with Ken. I wholeheartely support all-female tournaments. I think that when you look at, our demographic in the StarCraft community, if you look at why people flock to certain communities, it's very much a issue of the socioeconomics of the demographic too. For example, if you take the fighting game community and you compare it to the StarCraft community, if you were to ask me to describe in a few sentences, why they are so drastically different in terms of what races are represented there, I would point out to the fact that you can go to an arcade and spend 25 cents on a game, and that's the grassroots of that community, instead of having to spend $2,000 on a computer. It's a huge difference, and it ties into the socioeconomic layout of our of different regions of the world and stuff like that. In terms of, obviously, I would love to see more diversity, both in terms of race and gender, in the StarCraft community. There was when I played Counter-Strike and I was on a team, I remember there was a Filipino kid from LA who was on my team, and he would either go out, he was in a real gang, an actual gang. He would either go out and hang out with his gang buddies, or he would come back in and play Counter-Strike and stuff like that. And so I was back then had wild ideas to I don't know, set up Head Start centers in inner cities with PCs and stuff like that, so people wouldn't it's the same concept as a Boys and Girls Club. I think it's a concept that's possible, but logistically somewhat difficult. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that computers that run games are traditionally fairly expensive. They're fairly high maintenance. You have to know how they work, so when they break, you can fix them without bringing someone, to fix them for you. It's like a fairly complicated thing. You can't just, drop 50 PCs at an inner city high school and expect them to work brilliantly for more than a month or something like that. There's maintenance involved. So I think that would be something that's really cool, but once again, the high cost of the computer and the internet and all those different things plays a factor.
Yeah, I definitely like female tournaments as well, and I definitely support any sort of micro community that wants to have its own events. Like, for example, I know there's a fairly big LAN that's happening in India, I think that's great for that community, because I believe that these kind of events are really good at sort of motivating that group of players to get better. I mean, female gaming tournaments, for example, cause motivation for female gamers to practice because they have something real and tangible that they're playing for. And I think the Collegiate Star League is a good example of that, in that it's sort of an amateur-based competition. But every season of the CSL, the skill level has steadily increased. I know, season 1 in Brood War, the average skill level is probably D+ in IC Cup, and by the end in season 3, the season 3 was the last season of StarCraft 1, the average skill level is probably C or C+, something like that. So it's kind of, these sort of micro tournaments help those smaller communities get better, and that one day, maybe, for example, there's going to be lots of LAN tournaments in India. Maybe one day we'll see an Indian player come to MLG who's, or get accepted into a major team like EG or Team Liquid. And I definitely think that those smaller tournaments are great. And especially in terms of sponsorship as well. You could see local LAN tournaments sponsoring a player, in different countries, like in Turkey. I know Turkey has a small eSports scene, and if that scene grows organically, then you can see Turkish players competing, for example, or Indian players, or any kind of minority players. Hopefully, as the years progress, we'll see a lot more of an international flavor competing in a multitude of events.
Just speaking a little bit about those micro communities, I know of 3 groups, girls, ladies, who are on the stream and who are in this audience. There are a few of you. There's Girls of StarCraft on Facebook. There's just great communities where you can just meet other people who, are in a very similar situation to you. DC LAN also, where are my people at? They're in here. DC has a great community. We eat Korean barbecue together. I'm sure a lot of you CSL kids also just hang out together. We know Berkeley goes bowling together every Saturday. So it's just a great way to meet people. StarCraft does bring us together. Next question, if we do not have a Twitter question. Oh, we have one? Yeah. We'll get more for the audience as well.
So, I got 2 pretty good Twitter questions. There's a lot that are really specific, but I think these 2 are really interesting. First of all, to all the panelists, what was your most rewarding moment working in esports? And kind of another thing is, what do you think is the one most important thing that esports needs to strive for this year?
Okay. It's hard to pick the most.
I need to acknowledge people who said those questions. So, at Frodan on Twitter and SWAT on the stream. So there you go.
In terms of the most rewarding, it would either be a toss-up between just sort of helping organize the CSL, or during the NASL Season 1 finals, the last day during the MC versus Puma finals, when we had over 1,000 fans just going nuts, and knowing that me and the 6 other people that work at NASL had literally not slept for 5 days to put that event on, and that at the end of it, so many fans were just going nuts about it, and talking about how that was the best series of StarCraft that was ever played. Just the amount of hard work that went into putting that on, and the fact that we did so much with so little was super rewarding for me.
For me, I think it was like my first New York BarCraft. We finally got Twitch swag, a bunch of Twitch swag from Twitch TV. It came in, and when the BarCraft was going, we were sort of giving out all this stuff. It was like T-shirts, sort of like flasks, drinking flasks, but like the most popular thing actually ended up being these Twitch TV coasters that were like sort of at the bar, because I had like 10 guys that were just smiling from ear to ear when they see these coasters, and it was really rewarding to me too, because that coaster, that moment, it represented sort of like a legitimization of sort of our passion and our hobby in a very, very public space. The football fans were sort of up on the upper level. They were sort of like pushed away for our event. We had gamer coasters on the bar, and there were gamer drinks on top of those coasters. So I think that moment, which sort of showed our sort of community actually getting a foothold in these public spaces, was probably the most rewarding moment for me as a BarCraft organizer.
I think my proudest moment is when NYU wins the CSL this season.
That was my second one when UCSD won in season 3.
My proudest moment, or kind of most relieved emotional moment, was Team Liquid runs a tournament called the TSL, and it's like a lot of work for very few people, and we're kind of like always terrified that something terrible is going to happen. Like internet goes down or computers blow up or something like that, and we have like 80,000 people just sitting there like, what's going on? So the moment when the final was over, I think it was Game 7, Thorazine against Naniwa, and it was over, and I remember just sitting there just being like, holy crap, like, I'm so happy that nothing bad happened and we pulled off successfully. So I was just sitting in my apartment, and I just remember going into the back room just like screaming my head off, and like, finally, it's over. And that was probably the moment I remember most.
In terms of rewarding moments, I guess I have one on a personal level and more on a professional level, although I think if you're involved in this industry, your professional work is very personal to you. On a personal level, I think every time the opportunity to speak about social issues has intersected with the whole video game thing has been, I get a sense of satisfaction out of expressing, I guess, my opinions and feelings in that area that is really can't be compared to other things, especially given my degree. It's not really easy to transfer that kind of stuff over to what I do for a living. It's really difficult to make a living as an activist, and plus the whole thing with StarCraft and video games is kind of cool. So I spend a lot of time doing that, and I tend to, I think, avoid, where possible, getting political and getting into that kind of commentary. But there have been a couple times, and it happens every few years, and one of them was yesterday, in which I kind of poured my heart out in an essay to the community, and I hope that it's validated. And when those kind of things are validated, it's an incredibly satisfying feeling. As far as a more professional moment goes, it would have to be when Huck won Orlando. And I'll say to everyone, Ken, Victor, and I were it was really late at night, and we were at outside of an abandoned cafe or something at the hotel. And I said to Ken and Victor, was it 80%? I said if I was interviewed in terms of who deserves credit for this Huck win, I would say that 80% of the credit would go to Liquid, because of the proximity of us signing him away from Liquid at the time, and they had trained him and helped him get really, really good. And I still maintain that. It was still an incredibly satisfying moment for me, because I think that what people don't realize, they a lot of people are like, oh, e.g., big checkbook, go buy your players and stuff like that. And it's really easy, and I think fairly understandable, to not see it being able to sign that player, being able to offer that contract that got that player was a culmination of about 8 years of work. And being able to sit there and experience that player winning a tournament and beating a Korean player while both of your parents are on stream watching for the first time, it's a pretty valuable experience for me. So that's why that was an amazing moment for me, and still maintain that you guys did such a huge part in making that possible too.
All right, so for the interest of time, we're going to ask future questions to limit it to 1 to 2 panelists. I love hearing all your answers, but just in the interest of time, getting more questions out there. So, audience question in the red.
This is for Alex, and I was just curious when you said that the industry is so volatile,
And yeah, you said the industry is so volatile, and I was curious how you contract your players and for what length of time, and how you manage that.
The most that I do right now is 1.5 years. I think we're getting to the point where I could feel comfortable offering a 2-year contract to certain players. Usually the minimum that I'll go for is 1 year, although sometimes I'll do 6-month contracts if they're, if it's kind of like a proving thing. But usually if I do a 6-month contract, I give myself a way to renew it without having to go and back onto the open market and do a bidding war. It's like a very interesting issue if you look back at like the TSL controversy a year ago with Puma and stuff like that. A lot of team owners, especially for example Coach Lee at that time, like he was really upset because he felt like he nurtured the player and he gave the player a house to get better, and the player left even though he was a free agent. He felt like it was unfair, but it's your responsibility as a team owner to make sure you're getting the right value out of your player while he's on your team. And I learned that the hard way with a couple players. I had a huge franchise player whose name I won't mention, but everyone here knows him, who went to do his own thing after being on IG for 2 or 3 years. We parted very amicably, but I was not happy about it. I didn't think it was fair because we paid him very, very handsomely while he was on EG at a time at which spending that much money on a player wasn't actually viable for our business. It was more of symbolic, that we should have a franchise player that is paid that much. And in my mind, I was investing for the long haul with this guy 5-6 years down the road, and he left after 2 or 3 years, and I'm like, well, I didn't get my return on the investment yet. That's my fault because I only had him signed for 2 years or 3 years. So it's your responsibility as someone who's making the contracts to make sure that if they leave, either you or they want to leave or their contract terms need to change, that you can keep them on in a way that's cost effective for you, or you get the value out of them while you're there. And it really bothers me when people start to talk about players like their property. This team, they found him, they nurtured him. It's that's a person who worked really hard, and they deserve their chance in the open market if they want it.
I think we'll have time for 2 or 3 more questions. The guy in the green.
Just along those lines, mainly for Mr. Garfield as well. In other professional sports leagues, they'll have a situation where all players, because there is a centralized body, if you're chosen through some sort of draft, there'll be a period which the team that does nurture the player has mandatory negotiating rights, so it doesn't have to be a contract situation. And I was wondering if you guys think anything like that would be either beneficial to StarCraft to help teams without a lot of money maybe keep their talent, and if that would even be possible in a league that doesn't have a centralized body and is known for multiple different tournaments and multiple organizations.
I mean, whether it's executable practically, I would go back to what I said before. I just don't think it's possible to execute it. In concept, I think, wow, that's actually my ringtone. Okay, so I lost a bet with Kevin from Twitch TV when I went with him to karaoke, and now my ringtone's K-pop. So thank you Kevin, thank you Mona for taking that out of the hall. The song is Hello by Shiny for anyone watching on stream. Okay, so the question, right? You actually are going to have to say that again because I'm my mind is blown by the fact that
about the drafting players.
Yes, so I think it'd be really good, and to your point about in concept, I think it'd be really good. And to your point about helping teams that are less established get more established faster, I agree that there needs to be a system in general to help smaller teams, get their players to events more easily. But at the same time, there's a line there. I had to work for a decade to get my team to where it is, and I don't want to make it really simple for anyone who wants to start their own team to get to where I am in a year because they have really easy access to, or too easy access to all these costs being covered for them and et cetera and stuff like that. So from that perspective, I would be somewhat cautious about it in concept, but I think it'd be cool.
This has to do with a story. Whenever I meet someone who I know is from Korea, I always like to ask them if they ever watch StarCraft on TV. The answer is usually maybe yes, it's not as popular as we think it is. But then I always ask them, do you know who Boxer is? And sometimes they say no, but then I say, do you know who Lim Yo-hwan is? And then they say yes, and that's generally been the answer. And my question with that is, most foreigner StarCraft players are more known by their IDs, like Naniwa or Huck. But then in Korea, most people are known by their actual names. Do you think to be more mainstream, if players should be more known by their IDs or by their real names?
I don't think there's a problem with knowing people by nicknames. I think a lot of athletes have nicknames. Obviously not to an extent that StarCraft players do, but a lot of NBA players have nicknames. A lot of NFL players have nicknames. I think that's completely fine. Is the gist of the question? We recognize what we see, and if a player gets to a point where we know his real name, then we know that guy's a star. If you can spell his name, it's even better. So I think a lot of the recognizable players, people do know their names, but IDs, fine.
I would say that one of the best examples of a pro gamer's identity being recognized in mainstream society, even though it's not really a success story from like a purist perspective, but from a corporate perspective, is Fatality. Like, he did CBS interviews, he did all this stuff, and his brand was recognized to the point where he sold millions and millions and millions of dollars in branded products. Now the people who were like super hardcore FPS duelers and stuff, like didn't think he was that big of a deal, but they used his alias to grow him on a mainstream level. They didn't use his regular name.
Black shirt.
I just want to say thank you to all the panelists and everyone for coming out, and all the other volunteers that are out here, because it wouldn't be possible without our community.
Thank you. Who's first? Sorry, we're just gonna go with it. Sorry, Mark.
And I guess you guys kind of touched on it before when you were talking about how the guy changed his shirt between matches. So maybe it's okay if someone buys all the shirts, but it seems like there's not so much fostering of like team loyalty. And do you guys think that's a problem? Because like when like MC switched teams, it was just like, okay, now he has 2 different letters in front of his name. Like he's still my favorite player or something like that. But do you think we need to push harder for like more team loyalty, maybe more team events or something?
I'll just respectfully disagree. I think that for Liquid at least, our philosophy with our team is that it's a family. I think that being on Liquid's a big deal. I think that all the guys are friends. They meet at events. It's a big deal when a player leaves. I think everyone that's followed the Chris Hug situation when he went to EG saw that goodbye post that he wrote to everyone. It was super long and kind of emotional, and I feel that that post kind of summarizes more about Liquid than any tournament that we can run. I think that post shows exactly what the team is about and why it's important and why we feel that being on Liquid is an important, different kind of experience, and that's what the kind of culture that we want to make around the team, not just be someone that sends people. Well, did you read the comments to the thread? Because people were, the reaction was quite huge and volatile. It was like you're on one end of the spectrum or the other. I feel that you have to establish a personality and culture for your team in order to be able to do that. I don't think, a lot of teams don't do it very well. I think they're just, but it is possible, and I think obviously Liquid's lucky to have a forum and a lot of users that are very tied to it. So, yeah.
For the most part, honestly, I think you're right. I think that the team business model is like scary from a number of angles. Namely that, especially if you have a particular player who's a huge franchise player and has, enough brand power and reputability around his own alias, that he could go and start a new team just based on his own name. It happened to me. And that's one of the most terrifying things is you spend all this, because as a team, at least the way I operate, you're a mix of, a marketing agency and a team. The team is not defined in the same way a traditional sports team is. I agree with you that most teams out there don't have a tremendous amount of brand or fan loyalty, but I think Liquid and EG are the ones that do. I think Liquid has more team, I think that to be on Liquid as a team and having fans that are fans of Team Liquid, I think they're better at that than we are. Almost certainly they are. I think that to a larger extent, our fan base is defined by the players in our team, but I still also think that we have a lot of people who are just EG fans. But it's a very problematic, scary aspect of the business model, and I have, my contract, I guarantee you, is longer than any other team's contract because I do not, there are non-competes in there. Players are not allowed to talk to some of our sponsors that we already have or that we're approaching or solicit them until 2 years after they leave the team if they leave. Because I learned from my lesson with the player that left. I'm not going to spend all this time and energy setting up these great marketing deals so that Huck, for example, can leave at the end of his contract, walk over to the monster rep that he now knows really well and be like, hey, you don't need to go through this middleman. Fortunately, I learned before the scene got too big and it could really, really hurt me severely.
And just really quick to add to that, I think that being a fan of teams rather than players actually is a better fan experience. I think there's an issue with longevity with professional gamers because they drop off and improve so quickly and differently throughout just months. It's not the same where you can be a Packers fan and be a Brett Favre fan for 15 years, and even that can change. For StarCraft, it's your guy is irrelevant sometimes in 3 months. He's just gone. So if you're a fan of the team, you have new players, you have other people you can be fans of, and your interest doesn't just drop when one player has a slump.
Yeah, I think along that point, the growth of team leagues is going to be really, really important in growing this aspect of StarCraft 2. I mean, in StarCraft 1, you have Pro League, which is much more popular than the individual leagues. And I think that we're not quite there yet, but I think viewership numbers, like the IPL Team League, the NASL Team League even, have been very, very strong compared to the individual tournaments. And I think as that grows, for example, I don't think anything could beat if there's a foreign team league, like an EG versus Liquid Live Finals, I think would probably break records because of just the storylines behind those teams. You can build behind those stories much more so than you can build behind the stories of individual players. And I think that in a year or two, StarCraft will for sure trend more towards team-centered events. And I think coming from a perspective of myself, who's running the NASL, that's something that I'm very keenly aware of and something that I personally believe, and that's kind of what I'm going to try to be pushing for in the future.
These are all great questions, but we actually are out of time because we do have a team league to be heading to soon. A lot of you are here for the Collegiate Star League, and we're going to have an event at 8 o'clock in the first multi-purpose room, first round, Princeton versus Harvard, but 23 colleges duking it out. But here we've begun a great discussion about esports, I feel, and this is something that doesn't get done often enough. And some of it has been sobering and realistic, and some of it has been hopeful because of our strong community. And I feel like 2012 is going places, and I just like all the panelists to give us, just one sentence takeaway, if you can, in these last few minutes.
Why am I always the one that starts? I just want to thank all of you for coming out, both in person and on the stream. And thank you for supporting not only StarCraft but esports in general. And of course, thanks for supporting the Collegiate Star League.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks to everyone. This is growing. I'm an optimist. I think esports are the future. That's my takeaway.
Yeah, I guess just thanks for attending. And if you get a chance, check out a One Nation of Gamers BarCraft near you. They're in like 10 cities now, and let me know what you'd like to see in those events besides StarCraft 2.
I just want to thank Mona for inviting me and everyone who's worked on the event. I'm very, very happy to be here, and thank you guys for coming. I think that I would just encourage everyone to look at esports, and whether it's your favorite team or broadcast or whatever, is like mutual property. I want to keep that, the aforementioned wall between, icons and players and teams and fans as non-existent as possible. And I think that whenever you support your favorite team or support a tournament or whatever it is, that's really what's going to keep this industry more sustainable and keep growing it.
I want to thank everyone for coming. Now say that I spoke at Princeton. I just want to say, like, if you have time, introduce someone to the game or a game that you like watching. Just be the most unabashed, passionate fan that you can, and introduce someone new to it. Take your time, be patient, but do that. And if everyone does that, then it'll be the start of something awesome for 2013.
All right, thank you all, and let's give a warm round of applause for our panelists.